afternoon. I call this meeting of the Administration and Finance Committee of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization to order. Our first item of business will be all of the announcements we do, and our amazing Executive Director, Tegan Tyke, has agreed to read these for us. Tegan, go ahead, please.
All right, thanks, Brian. I'm happy to give you a rest on this one. So first, I'll read our notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostonmpo.org /MPO_non_discrimination, DISCRIMINATION. Next slide, please. Now I'll read our accessibility statement. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Lauren McGee, MPO staff at lmagee@ctps.org, or call her at 857-702-3706, or contact her via the chat box. That's back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Tegan.
No, I jumped the gun. I told you I would mess up.
There's more.
I told you I'd mess up. I'm so sorry. So now I'll read the meeting guidelines. All participants join the meeting with muted microphones. Please do rename yourself if you haven't already to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After the roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves, and always remain muted, please, unless actively speaking to avoid background noise. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and then a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Next slide. First. And now I can pass it back off to you, Mr. Chair.
That was perhaps the best reading of the notices I've ever witnessed. Thank you, Tegan. Thank you. Introductions. Can somebody call the roll?
I can. Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Brian Kane here.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. MAPC.
Good afternoon, Eric Barrasso with MAPC.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins Advisory Council here.
City of Boston. And MassDOT.
Yep, Derek Cravat here from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
That's the role, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. Our first item of action is the consideration and approval of the February 29th, 2024 minutes, which we will get to after we have public comment. If there's anybody in the meeting who would like to make a public comment, you can use the raise hand function, and we would be delighted to hear from you. iPhone 2 is in the waiting room. That's usually Dennis.
I admitted him because I knew that was the case. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no worries. iPhone 2, are you perhaps the amazing Mr. Dennis Giambetti?
Well, I'm Dennis Giambetti, but I'm not amazing. But yes, that's me.
Thank you, Dennis. Let the record show that Dennis is here.
Mr. Chair,
And that I think he's amazing.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Oh, even better. Is there a second? I second it. Someone call the roll.
You can't do that, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I can, and I will.
No, I'll just give you a hard time. Well, I'll step back. So okay.
Leonard thirds it.
Yes.
Laura, can you call the roll?
Yes.
I was
Right.
Island.
Good.
Yeah.
Quick. Going back.
Dennis, you're not muted anymore.
Oh,
No, you're not amazing either.
Brian Kane.
Yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
yes.
Now
Eric
he's amazing.
Barassa,
Eric Barassi, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
and Derek Cravat.
Derek Cravat, yes.
That motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. Item 2 is, well, not item 2, but the next action item is the state fiscal year 2024 year-end budget update from Haral. I assume it's you, Haral.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Haral Gandhi. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations at CTPS. Thank you for being here today as we review the financial results for state fiscal year 2024. Today, Silva Ivazian, our accountant, and I will focus on how we ended the year with a surplus and explain how some of the line items remain difficult to estimate accurately. Next slide, please. So the state fiscal year 2024 concluded with a surplus of $225,000, indicating that our revenue exceeded our expenses. Although a surplus may initially appear favorable, our primary objective is to achieve a balanced budget where revenue and expenses align. A balanced budget ensures optimal use of our resources without over or under allocating funds. The projected overhead rate for the year was 120.3%, but it ultimately came in at 113.2%. With this variance, while this variance contributed to the surplus, the significant difference suggests that certain expenses were lower than anticipated, underscoring the challenges that are involved while we try to accurately estimate expenses when we develop the budget. Several key expense categories contributed to the overhead variance due to the inherent difficulty in estimating them accurately. One was the office space move or rent increase. We had budgeted for a significant rent increase or expense related to office space move. But those expenses came in less than what we had projected because we were not able to get a lease at 10 Park Plaza or identify a space outside of the building to get a new lease. While these lease negotiations and lease, we are still working on putting the RFP out there for a potential office move. These expenses will be or are budgeted in SFY 2025. Another line item that we came in under was the legal fees, particularly those related to visa support. Some of those line items are harder to forecast since they depend on staff needs, especially those related to the recruitment of new staff members. Then talking about recruitment, we also experienced lower than expected costs related to hiring, including fees for recruitment firms or job advertisements. We did engage with a hiring firm in SFY 24 to help us with the recruitment of more technical positions. However, we weren't successful in getting a candidate through that hiring firm, so we ended up not spending that money. Even with like thorough planning, certain expenses, and this can lead to variances between the projected and actual costs. In SFY 25, as I mentioned, we are looking to manage our revenue and expenses and strive towards having a balanced budget. So there will always be elements of uncertainty in our projections, but some of the things that we're closely monitoring in SFY 25 is, again, the office space and lease negotiations, some of the contract and grant start dates. So as you may know, we've been awarded multiple grants through the federal. We've been awarded multiple federal grants, so we're just monitoring the start dates of those to make sure that our revenue assumptions are matching when the grants start. Professional development and training, some of the agency-wide training programs scheduled in 2024 had to be shifted to 2025. So some examples include DEIA training as well as project management training. And then recruitment and staffing. Staffing demands can change unexpectedly, so it's hard to estimate the costs associated with hiring and personnel changes. While these uncertainties can lead to variances, we will continue to monitor them closely to mitigate their impact and move towards a more balanced budget. Next slide, please. So as of June 30, 2024, I wanted to note that our net position stands at $873,000. Over the last 5 years, we've seen an average change of about 5%. This year's surplus is a reflection of the same uncertainties and challenges in estimating key expenses. While the past 2 fiscal years, SFY23 and SFY24, both delivered surpluses, we should remember that from SFY 2020 to SFY 2022, we faced deficits, further highlighting the uncertainty and prediction of these categories with accuracy. Next, I will hand it over to Silva to provide more details of the last quarter in SFY 2024.
Thank you, Earl. Hi, everyone. My name is Silva Avazian, and I'm an accountant here at CTPS. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, I will start out by first providing a summary of our financial standing through the year. Looking at this table here, specifically looking at Q4, you'll notice that our revenue and expenses were quite close. This was primarily due to Q4 being the months of April, May, and June, where we saw more vacation time being used due to the number of holidays, which included Patriots Day, Memorial Day weekend, as well as Juneteenth. And of course, with staff taking time off, it resulted in less working days for the quarter. Looking at our expenses, as mentioned, it was quite close to our revenue in Q4 as we ramped up on DEI training for staff, engaged with an external legal firm to assist with the RFP for our office space, started a compensation plan refresh for the agency, just to name a few. We also saw an increase in a few other admin activities related to performance assessments and evaluations, as well as work scope and budget development, which was expected in Q4. You'll notice that we ended Q4 with an overhead rate of 121.96%, which was closer to our anticipated and really helped average out the year due to the lower rates in prior quarters. Overall, looking at the last column here, we ended the year with an overhead rate of 113.20%, and I'll actually get into the details of the impacts on both revenue and expenses in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, let's take a look at the entire state fiscal year as a whole. We have 2 budget-related columns here, our approved/projected budget, as well as our actual year-end financials. Firstly, our revenue, we had projected a revenue of $7.8 million, but we ended the year with $6.8 million. Of course, with revenue, as Raul mentioned, there is always going to be some variance, especially with staff numbers and contracts coming in at various times of year. So a slight variance is expected. One of the biggest impacts of this year's variance in our revenue was related to the Safe Streets for All grant, as well as our staff positions. For example, we had a few major retirements in the beginning of the year, which of course we couldn't necessarily budget for back in April. We've also had some open positions that weren't filled for quite some time. For example, we actually currently have an open position for manager of model development, which hasn't been filled for over 8 months now. So although these examples might seem minute, they really do impact our revenue. There was also quite a delay in our Safe Streets for All contract due to some of the paperwork, but as well as the time it took in filling the role of our Vision Zero transportation planner. As far as our expenses, we had anticipated 7.8 million and ended the year with a total of 6.5 million. As Raul mentioned in her overview, one of the driving factors of this was the amount allocated towards a potential office space move. A few other examples impacting this included legal activities and relocation reimbursements, where we had less than anticipated expenses throughout the year. We had also budgeted for trainings throughout the year. Some of those actually had to be rescheduled. However, one thing to note is we did utilize some of this unused money in our budget for other line items, such as engaging with a temp help agency and filling our HR temporary position role throughout the year. Next slide, please. Thank you. This next slide here shows a graph of our agency's projected revenue in blue, which as a reminder is a straight line projection versus our actual revenue in orange through Q4. We have multiple categories to our revenue sources, including MPO and MassDOT directed PL funds, MassDOT SPR funds, MassDOT other projects, which includes our MassDOT on-call contract, an MBTA category, and an other category, which includes our Safe Streets for All contract. Looking at this graph, we notice that our overall highest funding source is the MPO and MassDOT directed PL category. Looking at the blue bar, a straight line projection would indicate that we'd be at 5.8 million through the year, and our actual charges have been closer to 5.3 million. So we've charged about 90% of what was expected by this time of year, which means we're actually on track to spend out our PL funds through the federal fiscal year. Then we have our MassDOT SPR category, where we've charged about 70% of what was expected. We've exceeded our projections in the MassDOT other category and charged 95% of expectations in our MBTA category. You'll notice that the other category didn't quite meet the straight line projection for the year, which was primarily due to the Safe Streets for All grant, where work didn't start until a bit later than expected due to staffing. Overall, looking at the far right column here, we ended the year with our revenue at 86% of what we had projected. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to our expenses. As a reminder, our agency expenses are broken down into 3 categories, including admin expenses, direct labor, and direct costs. Looking at all 3 categories, you'll notice that admin expenses and direct labor are very close to our projections. However, our direct cost category was a bit low. A big part of this direct cost category included consultants related to the Safe Streets for All grant. And although consultant work did begin later in the year, it just wasn't at the rate that we had projected because it took quite some time to contract with a consultant, which directly impacted this category. Overall, looking at the far right column, we charged about 87% of what was projected, which balanced out with our revenue in the prior slide. Next slide, please. Thank you all for your attention. And before I pass it on to Haral for an update on the SFY25 operating budget, are there any questions regarding the SFY24 budget?
Questions for Haral or Silva? So I'll just jump in and say, great job overall. We're trying to manage the budget. It's almost impossible to get these things down to zero when you're making the budget 18 months in advance. But I think the experience of this team is shining through here, and I just want to thank you for the hard work and as good a job reading minds and crystal ball gazing as possible. I think I said it last year and I'll say it again this year. I am concerned about the lack of a lease. I know that there are many things happening well above everyone's pay grade here with respect to office space in 10 Park Plaza. But I don't think this committee would be doing its job if we didn't at least note for the record our uncomfortability, that's the word, with the lack of a lease for the office space of the organization. safe in the knowledge that I know how this stuff works. But I would continue to encourage you to try to get a lease or continue to look for outside space. And again, I think I've made some recommendations in the past, and I would be happy to work with you again on that. Or make some of my staff available to help out on that if need be. Otherwise, I understand the difficulties in hiring, and I also wanted to congratulate you, Tegan, and Gina, and everybody on the hiring that you have done. I think you've brought on a multitude of people in the past 12 months, which is not easy. Onboarding is hard in the easiest of times. It's incredibly difficult. It's much more difficult now in a sort of a hybrid environment. But I think you folks have certainly done a lot of it, and I give you a lot of credit for that. So, Tegan, I see your hand. Go ahead, please.
And I appreciate you putting those comments on the record, and we have not given up on the lease search. We've had some capacity challenges in some of the skill sets needed to go through the lease procurement process. And so that has been ongoing, but not going at the pace that we had anticipated. So I want to make sure you know that it's not stopping. It's just gone a lot slower than we had anticipated originally. So I agree with you completely. I also have concerns, and it's important to get a stable lease in place.
I appreciate that, Tegan, and I know that everyone is doing what they can, and we are moving as quickly as possible, which is not always as quick as any of us would like, but nevertheless, I do appreciate your efforts. But I do feel like the committee needs to go on the record just saying what we said. And if it helps, you can blame us and blame me for demanding a lease. I got nothing to lose anymore. So those are my comments. Anyone else have anything to add? Okay, so question then, Haral and Silva, did you want us to accept this update? Do you feel that's necessary, or are you comfortable just leaving it as an update and letting it be known that you did it, you delivered it?
Yeah, I think we're okay with accepting it as presented. There's no approval needed for this. It's just a status update.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. So let's move on to item 3, which is an operating budget update for state fiscal year 25.
Yeah, thank you. Next, I'd like to present the revised operating budget for SFY 2025, which now includes a significant addition of 3C funding from previously de-obligated funds. So as you may recall, in May, you approved the SFY 2025 operating budget totaling $8.5 million. Next slide, please. Then in June, an additional $370,000 was added to the federal fiscal year 2025 MPO contract, bringing the updated budget to $8.87 million. This additional funding will allow us to advance several key initiatives over the next fiscal year, working closely with external consultants to drive progress on important projects, including website redesign, identity and rebranding, the development of the FTA stops model that will enhance our ability to model transit usage, particularly in estimating public transit demand more accurately, an assessment of the DEI for the agency, and also purchasing bicycle and pedestrian data collection equipment. The operating budget has been fully updated to reflect the additional funding. Since these are pass-through funds primarily allocated for consultants rather than staff time, there is no impact on the overhead rate. These adjustments put us in a strong position to move forward with these high priority projects that will help us achieve our goals and objectives in the coming year. I'll pause there and take any questions related to this update.
Thanks, Raul. So just talk a little bit about why this was included sort of at this point and not earlier. I know this was unforeseen and it's good news, but just talk about sort of how we got here, please.
Yeah, it's just a matter of paper, working with MassDOT. I think Derek, we worked with Derek and David Moeller at MassDOT to secure these funds and get the approvals of these funds. And it happened around the same time that the budget was approved. So we weren't able to do it back in April when the budget was being developed.
I understand. And it's good news, obviously, and we're grateful for the additional funds, and I think the way that they're proposed to be utilized makes a lot of sense. I'm especially fascinated by the DEIA inclusion piece here, so that'll be fascinating to see. Look forward to seeing that. Any questions from the committee members about
I'd just
this?
like to add that, I think it's great, that, this is the first time, I think, right, that, we've been able to access these deobligated funds. No, you're shaking your heads. Did we access it last year?
We had about, let's see, I forget, 140,000 in SFY 2024. Those
Okay.
came through pretty late in the year,
Okay.
so that's why. But yeah, we have them in 2024, and then for federal fiscal year, sorry. So this is kind of for federal fiscal year 2024, we added 140,000. For federal fiscal year 2025, we're adding 370,000.
Well, I think it's great.
Here. Anyone else have anything to add?
I just
Tegan?
had a slight further addition there, just that I think I really appreciate what MassDOT's done to think through how to coordinate on this, where last state fiscal year / fiscal year, we were asked during the fiscal year, recognizing that there was an increasing remainder of deobligated PL funds. All the MPOs in the state were asked if we wanted to try to access use of those for certain areas of work that MassDOT would then review and decide whether or not to allocate those funds. For this federal fiscal year, MassDOT started that process with us before the start of the federal fiscal year. And so we all submitted ideas for how to use those deobligated funds months ago so that they could be put into our federal fiscal year contract. So they didn't quite make it into the state fiscal year 2025 budget, but they did make it into the federal fiscal year 2025 contract, which means less administrative work and overhead and more time for us to actually use and spend down the funds within the federal fiscal year.
Understood. And I think I would share your gratitude to MassDOT for changing their approach to streamline the process. So again, thank you, Derek. Thank you, David Moeller. Thank you, everybody that worked on this.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this update? Okay, we'll move on to our update from Tegan.
All right, thank you, Brian. I have to hear my voice a little more again. So I'm planning, I think, to speak to just about 10 minutes. I wanted to give an update on the goals that I've worked to establish through my evaluation process for for state fiscal year 2025. And then since there have been a few months of that state fiscal year that I've already passed, I can summarize some of the updates to that we've made since the beginning of the state fiscal year, some progress we've made. Note that there is a memo posted to the meeting materials, so you can always refer to that for more detail. I'll try to be brief. And then I'm happy to converse and ask and talk about any questions you might have. And then as per in the operations plan, this group is meant to discuss these on a quarterly basis. And if you would like, you can recommend changes, adjustments, put your kind of input into what those goals are that I've established for the state fiscal year. So let's go to the next slide, please. And then the next slide. All right, so my evaluation, just like all of our staff, occurs every year as we approach the end of the state fiscal year. In case people's minds are getting muddled, the state fiscal year is July 1 to June 30th, and the federal fiscal year is October 1 to September 30th. So that's why these things get a little challenging to track. And I'm sorry, my cat is making repeat visits. So for the operations plan, it's described that I will have an evaluation team made up of the MPO's chair or their designee, which in this case was David Moeller from the Office of Transportation Planning at MassDOT, the MPO vice chair, which in this case was Mark Drazen from Metropolitan Area Planning Council, MAPC. Eric Barotha here is one of the designees. And then the chair of the MPO A&F committee, your very own Brian Kane here from the MBTA Advisory Board. And in that evaluation, I talk about the way the form works. I talk about things like when I was most engaged in my work in the prior year, what kinds of barriers I encountered, the progress they made towards that last state fiscal year's goals, establish new state fiscal year goals, and then talk about action steps that we can accomplish together towards meeting them. So next slide, please. All right. So getting into state fiscal year 2025, the goal categories that I set this year more or less mimic the agency's 5-year strategic plan goal areas. I did that last year. I had to kind of bundle them. I didn't do that sort of at the start. And so this year from the start, I really bundled them into these strategic plan goal areas. The one caveat is that the first category here, identity and awareness, I used to just sort of capture 2 goals in the strategic plan, which were sector leadership and marketing and public presentation. I didn't feel it was useful to break those apart in my goals. The reason why I like to make this alignment with the strategic plan goals is to sort of really be transparent that I'm working towards the goals for the agency. And those goals were not only sourced from me, but also through a lot of engagement with staff and also with other kind of key stakeholders for the MPO. So I am continuing my own thinking in parallel alignment with those goals. And then one more caveat I have is that these goals are not goals that I can complete by myself or that I even put the majority of effort into necessarily. My establishing them in my evaluation signals that I prioritize them, and I will put the effort through my position into making sure that they can get completed. But that does not mean that I can take credit for all or any of the effort at times, other than sort of really setting the stage for others to be able to do what they do so well. So next slide, please. The quick highlights of the goals I established under each category. In the area of identity and awareness, my goals for this coming year were to continue to sort of speak at different forums about what the MPO is and increase that awareness and understanding of the work. And then also, Harold talked about this a little bit with the deobligated PO funds, but I really have a identity and branding exercise for the agency. I will say I barely missed our 50th anniversary, which would have been one of the more fun years to do an identity and branding. But now that we're 51 years old, I think it's still a good time to sort of take a look at how we identify and whether or not we should have 1 name or 2 names as an example, since we go by CTPS and MPO staff. Next slide, please. All right, under the area of programs and services, this is where we're really talking about how we do our internal work. And I have multiple goals here associated with shifting the culture of how we plan our work and prioritize resources at the agency in like a 1-year framework. We have a contract with Mass DOT that is 1 year in length. We get federal funding numbers annually, year by year, to know how much money we have in terms of planning funds and capital funds. And we have an annual work program, which is the UPWP. And I think over time, we've sort of like, we've sunk into this sort of 1-year framework of thinking year to year, whereas our long range plan has a set of 20-year plan, right? So a set of goals associated very long term. So in our leadership retreat over a year ago, we really identified a gap there between making sure our annual work plans are really serving those longer term goals in a measurable way. And so we have goals to have all the kind of the program managers and the folks who are leading couriers of work at the agency develop multi-year plans for their work, and then continue to engage in sort of developing focus areas for work, which we've called themes in the past, that can sort of extend over multiple years of work planning, and then align our UPWP development process with that sort of more multi-year mindset and vision. Next slide. The governance goals sort of build on what we've already been working on and talking about. One is to, now that we have the operations plan in place, really integrate it into our work and our work planning. And then the other being to really work to expand board members' exposure to development opportunities, continuing to better enable board members to make informed decisions on the MPO. Next slide, please. So in the areas of organizational structure and staffing, one thing I had celebrated in the past that we were able to do several years ago was create a compensation plan, which it doesn't do everything we need it to do, but it does help enhance our ability to hire and retain staff by creating a sort of a transparent structure for jobs and compensation ranges at the agency. And those are supported by market data. So over the past 3 years, we've been making modest minor updates to that existing plan. With the biggest kind of outcome of that was really impactful is realizing that we had really missed a jump in terms of compensation. And so we were able to make the case for mid-year salary adjustments for some of our core career tracks. So now what we are due for is a full refresh of the compensation plan. So taking a look at everything again and establishing a new version of that plan that is up to date and based on current market data as a whole, and also doing that in a way that engages staff in that process. And then as you already heard, I still have a core priority to make sure that we are either moving or renovating the existing office, which requires a reliable lease. Next slide. And then lastly, in the area of, actually two last areas, in diversity, equity, and inclusion, Hurl also kind of gave a little preview of this, but we have received funding through the deobligated PL funds to fund a significant DEI initiative that was identified by the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Committee at the agency. And the next slide. And then we really want to continue our good practices in funding and operations, and kind of expand on our ability to fund our work. So we are still also working on finalizing an up-to-date fiduciary agent agreement with MAPC as our fiduciary agent. That has been a, kind of an ongoing lift, and it's one thing to develop the work, it's another thing to sort of negotiate it at the end. And so that is still in progress. We have implemented practices that have helped us stay away from any significant deficits or surplus. As for all you mentioned, we're going to continue to sort of work to keep that as close to zero as possible. And then the goals related to diversifying funding sources and also expanding our relationships with potential partners. All right, so next, on top of what I just said, I'll highlight some kind of specific progress towards these goals. If you can go to the next slide. So back up to identity and awareness. I've had the pleasure over the last 3 months, the first quarter, coming up with some repeat opportunities and some more unique opportunities to be able to talk more about the MPO and the MPO's work. In July, there was sort of for us a first time attendance at a City of Boston Council hearing where I sat on a panel of experts talking about sort of the implications of implementing congestion pricing in urban areas. In August, I had sort of a repeat visit to the YW Lead Boston Equity Program, which is a program I participated in, and I go back now every year and talk about transportation challenges in the Boston region and the MPO's role in working to address and support those transportation challenges from an equity lens. And then in September, I was able to work with Bard Foundation. They were doing a series of grantee development sessions and workshops, and we were able to lead one that focused on that sort of regional funding space and talk about, again, the work of MPOs. I would also say there is a really amazing opportunity this year in terms of attending the National Association of MPOs, the national conference. I've been able to send more staff than I ever have before to the conference this year. And there was a lot of conversation about continuing to sort of refine and update the legislative priorities that AMPO is going into this next transportation reauthorization that would help support MPOs doing the work that they do. I've also had an opportunity to continue to share the sort of the challenges and opportunities in the Massachusetts context with other MPOs across the country. And it's a really great opportunity to share ideas and best practices and perspectives. Also, as a board member on AMPO, I was able to attend closed door sessions with a research institution that's looking at stewardship of federal transportation dollars, and also with Shailen Bhatt, who had just stepped down from his role at FHWA, and get his perspective. So I did run for the board again and was elected again, and will serve another 3-year term on that board. And then lastly, as has been mentioned, I've worked through OTP to get access to this deobligated PL funds, and we will be carrying out a branding and identity exercise with a consultant in FFY 2025. Next slide. So under programs and services, I talked about that goal of shifting culture to planning our work in a more multi-year way that is working towards our long-range goals in a measurable way. The specific things that we've accomplished over the last several months is getting the majority of our program managers to submit these multi-year work plans to help us understand how they envision their work evolving. And through our leadership retreat that's happened over the last month, we've really begun to create an agency multi-year plan, which we're calling an action plan, that will help create a framework around the body of work that all of these programs and areas of work do. So that's been started, and we'll keep moving towards implementing this. I think it will be a multi-year process to really implement this cultural change, but we're able to make really concrete steps along the way. Next slide. And governance updates are just that we have begun already embedding the operations plan into our agenda setting process with Mass DOT, OTP, and MAPC, the vice chair and chair. So we've begun to kind of flesh out that framework. And we also, at this point, in terms of new board member, we've been able to develop a new training, 101 or sort of training orientation for board members And we're still working on other ways to support board member learning. We did submit a request to use the obligated PL funds to send AMPO board members to the national conference, sorry, AMPO, our board members to the AMPO conference. And that request was not approved. And so we're sort of thinking about other ways in which to try to support that. The lucky thing is that the next AMPO conference is in Providence. So it's a slightly more feasible sort of trip to think about supporting within our existing planning funds. And then next slide, please. In organizational structure and staffing, the key thing is that I talked about the compensation plan refresh. That has in fact started and is well underway, and we expect to finish this in this calendar year so that it can inform the next year's performance assessments and salary adjustments. So just to highlight on some of the things that we're talking about with the consultant right now, include adding in a framework for hourly, part-time, or per diem and per diem staff that we employ through like data collectors, and also sometimes these are retirees who we've rehired to work in specialized areas. We also are looking at a variety of updates and refinements in our job classifications and titles. We're refining the benchmarking, particularly in a few individual manager and director roles that have specific skill sets associated with them. And we're also considering another separate special track for specialized skills. Primarily in this case, we've been really struggling, as was also mentioned previously, in terms of getting on board the types of travel demand model skills for the more advanced data development and data work that's involved with the travel demand modeling on our staff. So we're looking at whether that requires its own track or tiering. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of DEI, we've had a couple of sort of mini efforts that have gone underway. So over these last 3 months, we've been able to spend some funds supporting the DEIA committee by hiring a consultant to kind of coach them a bit through how they're working as a committee. And we've also done an initial diagnostic on the approach to doing a bigger DEIA assessment in the coming year. And so we have started so far scoping what that DEIA assessment could look like as we get into this federal fiscal year. So that's not out for procurement yet, but we are starting along that path. Next slide. Last but not least, in the area of funding and operations, I already gave an update earlier on that we're sort of trying to slowly advance the fiduciary agent agreement. We're making some progress now and we'll be approaching talking about negotiations of that agreement, I hope, in the coming months. And then I did also want to mention the grants that have all been awarded in the last 3 months, which sum up to quite an amazing opportunity, not just for additional funds for the MPO and partner agencies that we are working with, including MAPC and others, but also really have this opportunity to continue to build these partnerships and relationships with the agencies working on this grant with, and also the people that the stakeholders that we are bringing in through our engagement process in these grants. So I have talked about all of these at MPO meetings and the executive director's report, so I won't summarize them all again. But note here we have everything from the kind of the smaller MADI grants about access and transportation security, for $150,000, moving through the Vulnerability Preparedness Action Grant, which is more than $1 million. And then the most recent second round of SIFs for us, Safe Streets and Roads for All, Discretionary Supplemental Planning and Demonstration Grant. And that total with the local match is up over $9 million, which is quite significant. Next slide. I hope that feels like a thorough update, and I'm always open to suggestions as to what enough or too much, but I wanted to give you all some fodder for discussion if you'd like to. So I can defer to you, Brian, if you want to.
Well done. Go ahead, Len.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions, and please give short answers because I know time is running short, and then maybe we can fill them in longer some other time. So the compensation plan, was there any consideration to doing that with MAPC?
Yes, in fact, we used the same consultants as MAPC did.
Yeah, okay.
So we were able to leverage the relationship, and they were able to build on the classifications and things that they built for MAPC. There are some differences, but we absolutely leveraged that. Yes.
Okay. All right. Because I was figuring both organizations might want to do that. And if and if they hadn't done it, then it might be an opportunity to do it at the same time. But it seems like they've already done it and just using the experience that they've had. So good, that's fine. With respect to accessibility, the DEI, so the accessibility, what angle are you coming from on that? Is it physical accessibility or other things like website accessibility?
It's the broader sense of accessibility. It can
Yeah.
be physical, mental, any other kind of disability that an individual might face or focus on.
Okay.
Our team feels really strongly about having that be a part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also
Right.
sort of standing out as its own emphasis area.
Right. Because I mean, what we find, in town is that we have a big accessibility for our website. I mean, and there are a lot of things that you can do with websites to make them more accessible. And I was wondering if that's where you're coming from. Look, more DEI is always good. It seems to me that that's not an issue with CTPS, but you know better than I do, and I certainly know that sometimes we aim for diversity, but the pool from which you draw just isn't very diverse. So you can do all you want, but you just can't really achieve much because you just don't have that diverse a pool, and it's not your fault that the pool isn't big. So I hope that we're not like selling ourselves short on what we're doing with respect to diversity. So that's the basis of my question and comment. Board learning opportunities, is that only geared towards new member orientation?
That's what we've been able to accomplish most effectively recently, but we need to do more. I think we want to support the board members, and we've heard from board members that you want more opportunities to interact with peers and sort of learn in helpful ways. So that's one of the reasons why the national conference was on the list of things to consider.
Right. Well, is there any possibility of bringing back materials from those national conferences that can be
Yes.
shared? Okay.
I am
All right.
overdue in sending some of those materials. They are very useful. I sent some out last year, a year ago as well, and there's some
Okay.
nice updates to those.
Okay, great. And you mentioned that you want board buy-in. In the memo. So what do you mean by that?
Sorry, where did I say board buy-in? I'm so sorry.
Let me see if I can find it in the memo. Let's see. Challenges and needs. The success of the executive director goals is dependent on continued attention and buy-in from board members to implement processes. So that's in two challenges, areas and needs. Page.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Page
thank
6.
you.
Yeah.
This is in the DEI space. So one of the things that, in terms of really continuing to advance and keep DEI and A initiatives sort of live and present. So one thing, going back to your earlier comment, Len, we may be doing lots of great things, but there's always things that we're missing and can do better.
Right.
And so a DEI assessment is definitely a kind of a standard thing. And this is also something we're leveraging, we're learning on some of the work that MEPC is doing with their staff as well. But just to assess where we're doing well and where we're missing the boat in terms of really creating the space for that diversity in an inclusive way. Board buy-in, I feel, is important to continue to have you all support for us advancing that. Otherwise, one could assume that it was superfluous. And so keeping that interest that you all might have in that space and that work we're doing internally is important to me.
All right. But I guess, so if I were to say, I'm just trying to understand what it is to ask me for the board members with respect to buy-in. You present the goals to the board and we approve it with a vote, or is there more that you want from us for?
There's not more. It's not something more specific than that. It's ongoing support.
Okay, all right, that's fine. And so lastly, my suggestion for rebranding is just to call yourselves the MPO Brain Trust.
Brain Trust.
Trust. Mic drop.
MPOBT. We're not gonna crowdsource a new name. I have to tell you that one.
Oh, okay. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Len, and I appreciate that the buy-in does not involve cash. That would cause some problems, but thank you.
Good point. Good point.
I have some questions, but I want to see if anybody else on the committee has anything to ask or suggest. So Tegan, whenever I go through these processes with goals and stuff, it's awkward, it's weird, but it's important, and I'm really glad you're going through it. This is our second year, I think, doing this, and I think we've gotten better, and I really just appreciate this. But my question to you is, how do you think it's going, and are these the right goals for you? right? Is this all working? Or would you change anything, or, what else can we as a committee do to be more supportive or less supportive, or get out of your way, for instance?
I think these goals are in line with what I feel is important to advance, my career in this role with this agency. And I think that they are for the benefit of the agency. They're not the only things that need to be done for the benefit of the agency, but they're the ones that I want to emphasize and call out. So I feel comfortable with what I have put together in terms of goals for me. I would certainly welcome, any feedback if somebody thinks I'm missing a focus area, should be focusing on to improve how the MPO works. With you all, what is helpful for me is that when I talk about my goals, sometimes it is useful when talking to stakeholders that they are not only me trying to advance them, but they have the broader support of the various entities that are part of this MPO board. And so if there's sort of resistance to or questioning, it's not just me who's sort of thinking through the value of that, but it is the sort of the board stakeholders. We both report to our board, but I also look to our board to stand up and be supportive of the things we're trying to accomplish when we meet barriers. So that's the way I look at it.
Very fair, very fair. And I think the fact that you've aligned everything, or are in the process of aligning things, also makes a lot of sense. And kudos to you and the team for doing that. We've done a lot of getting stuff on paper, I guess I would say, over the last few years, and I think it's starting to really, not just starting, but continuing to show the benefits of doing that. So again, thank you, and I take your point that we need to be better cheerleaders for you and the organization. So let me figure out how to do that as well. Anything else on this item? If not, we'll go to our next item 7, which is members update. Does anybody have any regional concerns or local community issues they'd like to discuss? Seeing none, when's our next meeting, Haral? Oh, hi, Haral, there's your hand.
Our next meeting is to be determined, but most likely we'll provide an update on SFY Q1 in I think end of November is what we're shooting for. And I had raised my hand, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, because I wanted to introduce Ronan Bugle, who is we hired him in July. He came on board. He's the accountant and he's helping Silva and is a key player on our finance team. So I forgot to mention that he is in this meeting, and I just wanted to acknowledge his value to our team.
Welcome, Ronan. I'm sending you proverbial fireworks through the Zoom reactions.
Thank you.
In the toolbar, as I was told to do by Tegan when she read the instructions earlier. So thank you. Welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Great meeting. Thank you. Thank you, Tegan, for a good update.
So
Here, without objection. Are you objecting, Len?
No, I was gonna let you second. I'll wait for you to second it, but you're not even gonna do the second. You're just gonna get us out of here.
Hey,
So
Moeller
long.
doesn't take a second for the MPS, so without objection, we're adjourned.
So long.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.